So hi there and welcome to this, our first webinar of 2024. I'm really delighted to have two experts with me on the webinar this afternoon. Two people that I met quite recently, just before Christmas, and I saw them presenting at an event in Nottingham. And when I saw them sharing in their various presentations and conversations, I knew that they would have so many great insights to share around things around well-being, work-life balance, mindfulness, all these different things. Our two guests come from a heritage right across the years within education. And as I say, it gives me great pleasure to be able to bring these two panelists to you today. I won't go into their full CV because if I was, then that would probably take the whole hour for all the things that they've done and achieved and accomplished during the course of their careers. But I'll bring in them one by one in just a moment. And when I do so, I'll ask them themselves to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work. But I know, having seen them present and share before, there's lots and lots of things that you'll be able to take away from the conversation today. It may well be during the course of the webinar as well that you have some questions, and of course you're very welcome to feed those questions through into the chat. For the most part, those questions will probably be answered at the end of the webinar. However, if there is something really sort of pokey and salient that ties in quite nicely with the conversation we're having, then I'll see if I can bring that question into the conversation during the course of the webinar this afternoon, if it works well. So first of all, I'd like to bring onto the stage Emma Samuel. Emma is a Chief Operating Officer at the St John Paul II Multi-Academy Trust. Welcome to the webinar, Emma.
There you go. After such a big welcome, I'm slightly kind of concerned now. But thank you ever so much for the invite and being part of this webinar today. I'm Chief Operating Officer for St John Paul II Multi-Academy, and I've had the absolute pleasure of doing that for the last 7 years. In terms of some people, I'm relatively new to education. I've done it for the last 12 years. And I think as people in education, we are phenomenally privileged to be shaping our future societies. And I think that is huge. And it drives me with a passion to make sure that we get the right people in the right place at the right time.
Well, I tell you, when I saw you present at the event in Nottingham, Emma, I loved the approaches that you and your colleagues have put into place in the trust. We'll talk about those more later, but I really can't wait for you to share about them and that mindfulness and the consideration. Crikey, I wish that if I was an ECT myself, having just graduated, starting working within a trust or a school, I would have loved to have been, not that I had a bad experience. But thinking around all these things has moved on so much more since way back then, which obviously was only like 3 years ago actually. I joke, of course. Let me bring on our next guest today. Next guest is Julie Hurst, who's got again a plethora of experience in the field of education and the topic that we're discussing today. She's a work-life balance expert, psychologist, coach, therapist. But again, I don't want to sort of do your full CV for you, Julie. So welcome. And would you mind just talking a little bit about your work and how you've come to be here today?
Yes, of course I will. Yes, I've got one of those job titles that makes people shy away from me at parties when they say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a psychologist." So I tend not to. But what I do is in the field of positive psychology. So in other words, I'm concerned with flourishing, living lives of meaning. So not waiting until something goes wrong and trying to fix it, but let's prevent that. So I work with schools throughout the UK, mainly with teachers and whole school staff. So I'm in the schools and helping them to bring positive psychology to their pupils. And every now and again, I'm allowed to be let loose with some pupils in schools as well, and I get to teach my favourite year group. Sorry, all the other year groups, but my favourite year group is year 5, because they're still young enough to believe and join in with all the nonsense that I get them to do. But they have some really deep thoughts. People underestimate what deep thinkers year 5 are, and so that's me. I spend most of my time either in education or the NHS, always talking about positive psychology, and every now and again I do crazy things with a group of 9 and 10-year-olds.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Julie. Well, we've got so much to cover in the course of the next 50 minutes now. That's all we've got left now. I'll put my hand up and blame myself for talking the most, I think. But hopefully that will stop from now, and we'll sort of tap into your expertise. I want to start with you, Julie, if I can first. You've got some extensive experience, not only in the areas you've talked about, but you've been involved in research and you've worked with lots of different organisations as well. When it comes to prioritising things like well-being and the mental health of colleagues and pupils and students, what sort of challenges are you finding schools and individuals are facing at the moment around those sort of key issues?
Well, it's interesting. I often say when I'm working with schools that when I first started doing this and talking about well-being, if I talked about pupil well-being, pupil flourishing, helping children be more resilient, I had a very, very warm welcome. But the moment I started talking about staff well-being, the welcome cooled, and not because people didn't want that, but somehow they didn't think it was as important as looking after the children.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that is changing, thank goodness, is that now schools are being more attuned to the fact that actually, if you want staff to give of their best, they've got to feel of their best in the same way we've learned to think about that about the children. So for me, the biggest hurdle I've ever had to get over is getting staff to think about themselves. You know, it's the old oxygen mask thing, put yours on before other people's. I think if we take that analogy to a school, it was put on every other single person's oxygen mask before your own, the entire plane load. So getting staff to seriously help themselves, start to do some of these things for themselves before tackling every other thing on their already overfull plates, has been one of the biggest challenges, because it's one of those professions that there is no let up. It's always on, and that for me is the similarity with the health service. I work with doctors and nurses. I was giving a talk at a hospital once, and a team of people apologized for being late because they'd been doing heart surgery, and I felt that was a good excuse. So, but it's an always on profession. You know, if I have an awful 15 minutes, I go and get another cup of coffee and sit down and talk to the cat for a minute, and then I'm okay. But if you're in a hospital ward, or if you're in a classroom, you can't do that. You are constantly switched on, and there is no let up. You might get a lunch break if you're lucky, you might get a tea break here and there, but even in those times, you are always on. And the toll that that takes on people hasn't really been understood. And that's why positive education, as it's called in schools, is becoming more and more popular here. So I think for me, the biggest barrier I face is getting teachers to understand they need to look after themselves.
No, thank you, Julian. And you bring up some really interesting points that sort of resonate there. We were talking before the webinar started about this always on thing. I say, you know, with a teacher, you're always, if I use myself as an example, I'm always, when I was a teacher, I was always Mr. Anderson. If I was shopping in Tesco or walking down the high street or filling my car up at the petrol station, I wasn't Mark. You know, if a child saw me, or even if, you know, I was down the pub and a parent saw me, I was still Mr. Anderson. And that's, you know, you've always got that sort of pressure and that knowledge of people who are watching you and there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely, but it does add a layer of things you have to be considerate of and mindful of, doesn't it? I wanted
Oh,
to,
it does.
sorry,
It's,
Julie.
oh, it's
Carry
okay.
on, Julie. Carry on.
No, it does. I remember one teacher telling me that she'd bumped into a family on holiday and had to have a somewhat uncomfortable conversation with them wearing her swimming costume. So you know, it never ends, and it is constant in the day, before school starts, when school finishes, at every break. But it's that idea, and much the same. There's such a similarity with the health service, where if I talk about how you can help be more patients become more resilient, yes, but the doctors and nurses, harder message. That did change. It is changing, thankfully, in schools as more and more positive education come in, because it has such a huge impact inside a school. And it has, I say it's for both the classroom and the staff room, and it needs to be practiced in both places.
No, I completely agree. And you talk about taking a break if you're lucky enough to have a break. But I mean, how many times does the staff room door get knocked with some issue or other? And I remember we'd look at each other and like, who's going to answer the actual door? Because somebody has to answer the door. You're like, oh, not me, not me. But they say you're always on, aren't you? One of the words you used, which really resonated then as well, Julie, which I've heard being used an awful lot, which I think is a really good thing. And it's certainly something which is being explored by people like the Foundation for Educational Development, and are doing research into this at the moment, looking at international curricula and what is education, asking those sort of questions. Is that this idea around human flourishing? That word flourishing, I think, is super, super important. And you want your colleagues to flourish, don't you? You want them to be able to do better and be better as a result of their engagement and work with you and for you within your organizations. Jumping on to yourself for a second, Emma, when we were at that event, you were talking, this is, I think, really ties in quite nicely with this idea of flourishing. You spent time talking about these pillars of belonging within your trust. I mean, I made notes as you were sort of talking through them at the event, and I tweeted it. My tweets went crazy. Yeah, it's clearly something which is really important, but we don't see it everywhere, do we? I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing about those pillars of belonging with the audience, where the idea came from for creating them, and then perhaps some of the impacts. I mean, I'd like to think I could guess what some of those are, mainly hugely positive. But I'd love to have you share about that and talk about where it came from, and I guess, like I say, some of the impacts that approach has had with colleagues across your trust.
I think it comes from, people have got to be at the heart of our delivery. You only get success in schools through great teachers, great support staff, great leaders. So what you have to do, in our opinion, is you have to create that sense of belonging. And to create the sense of belonging, when you start to look into that and you start to do a little bit of research, it's about a place where people feel valued, they feel positive connections, they can walk their authentic self into work. And from that, we develop the 5 principles. So welcomed. So what we do around that pillar is we do a really comprehensive induction, not only at a school level, but at multi-academy level. We want them to start feeling part of that family from day one. We're very keen to make sure, because there's no bigger frustration, that on day one, you've got access to every single system that you need. You're aware of where the toilets are and the staff room and all of those really basic things, but make it feel like you've been thought of. It's about making sure that you do those introductions, you introduce them to key people. The second pillar is around known. So just making sure staff feel as if they are known. So one of the areas that we did here was we do recognition. So we do work anniversaries. So every year, because we all have a work anniversary, we may not want to celebrate getting older, but we'll celebrate a year being in our job. So we recognise the impact as a team member. What have you done great this year that has really kind of impacted? Or is it the fact that you come in today wearing a smile every single day, regardless? So we have that recognition. We also have within the multi-academy a staff consultative committee. So we have representation from each and every school within the multi-academy. They come together and they'll talk about issues that are staff related. We'll have ideas about how they want to move things forward. We talk about key topics for them. And then as a senior leadership team, myself or one of my colleagues will attend those meetings, and we have a Q&A session. So they can ask us anything that's going on a strategic level, or they can sort of say, have you thought about this? So it's knowing our colleagues and working really close with them. One of sorry, I've jumped around. That was included. So that's included. So it's what we want our staff to do under the pillar of included is feel that they are heard. What they're talking has impact on the way that we shape our strategies and the direction for the future. And actually, we can have an idea, but the idea is going to be greatly enhanced and is going to be even more impactful if we have everybody's input into that on our strategic direction. Another pillar is supported. So one of the big things in education that we have is work-life balance, flexible working. How do you get that in for a teacher that has to be in front of a class? Then we have to start thinking differently. So we have to look at across the multi-academy. So we're really fortunate. We look across all our schools. It's being flexible in the way that we view things rather than the traditional approach. In terms of supporting staff, we have developed career pathways so people can identify. So not everybody will want to be the next CEO or the next head teacher or principal, but I might want to be the greatest TA that you ever did know. So there's still CPD around that. So we promote that quite forcefully across the multi-academy from day one of joining. So we will identify that. We want people to feel, and this is the last pillar, connected. So do we give them a chance to be able to work collaboratively across the multi-academy? So sometimes, particularly senior leaders in an organisation can feel very isolated and very lonely. So once you build in that collaboration, and we do that across key topics, do we look at networking outside of our schools and actually that whole piece about building a community as St John Paul II. So those are the 5 pillars, and it really comes down to, are we giving people that feeling that they belong to our family and that they're a key cog in our family?
That's brilliant, Emma. There's so much to unpick there. Just to make it simple, for people might be making notes. So can we just before I jump into the sort of follow-up question for you, Emma, could you just list those 5 pillars for the audience for me, first of all?
Welcomed, known, included, supported, and connected.
Crikey, well, if you're feeling all of those things as a result of having worked within the I'm looking up St John Paul II Multi Academy Trust, then it must be a lovely place to work. I wanted to dive a bit deeper, Emma, if I could. Have you had a chance to get some sort of feedback from colleagues about how this strategy with these 5 pillars has impacted them?
I think an area that is great for us, it sounds really simple, but under known, that workplace recognition, it works on every single level. So it goes from the CEO all the way through. So it's really great that people have felt that gratitude for what they do from their peer groups, and we've had really positive feedback on it. Another area where we've got and it's moving forward phenomenally is our staff consultative committee. That voice and that opportunity, because the representative, the chair of the staff consultative committee, which is one of the members of staff, gets invited and is part of our board of directors for HR and operations. So they have direct feedback to the board, which means they have the opportunity to shape and be heard really clearly.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Because I say, sometimes within organisations with a hierarchical structure, the lines of communication to actually have your voice heard when you're maybe at this end of that hierarchy versus at this end, you can often feel like, you talk about people being a cog. Well, cogs all need to turn and work together in tandem, don't they? And if you're not actually a cog as part of that conversation, then it can leave you feeling quite isolated and all those different things. That ties in really well, doesn't it, to this idea of having a sense of belonging within your organisation, which again is so good and helpful when it comes to feeling like you're actually making a difference. Most teachers I know got into the profession for that exact reason, to feel like they're making a difference and to help people and all these kinds of things. So it's brilliant to hear the positive feedback there, and thank you for sharing those pillars with us as well, Emma. Thank you. I wanted to jump in with a bit more of a spicy question, because as Julie was saying at the beginning, teaching is a profession where you are always on. And pastoral roles are one of those areas within a school where you do have the most sort of difficulty and stress. Often pastoral leads, heads of house, heads of year, they have very light timetables because they have to spend so much time dealing with the day-to-day issues in school, whether that's from safeguarding or bullying or other issues, things sort of flowing through the school. I wanted to ask you, Julie, teaching is, as I say, very, very stressful, particularly within pastoral roles, dealing with some very difficult scenarios. Have you got any tips on how to deal with these sometimes often emotional aspects related to these issues? And that could be about how some strategies for how people might sort of deal with difficult situations in the moment. Maybe you've got two students who are particularly angry, or something like that, or how when you I've seen with my sort of safeguarding hat on some really difficult things to digest and to reflect upon post work when you're sat at home of an evening thinking back about these things are happening in young people's lives. And again, it can have a big impact on you and be quite upsetting, or not quite, very upsetting. I wonder, have you got any tips for people who are in those sorts of roles as to how they might be able to sort of cope with some of those things?
Yes, well, interestingly, very early in my career, I realized that if you haven't invented something that's useful, steal it from someone else. So that's what I'm going to do. And this is the work of a woman called Professor Kristen Neff. And I admit, hold my hands up, I'm a complete Neffette. She's amazing. And she has something called the compassion break, the self-compassion break. So it's three very simple steps. The first one is recognize that this is hard. Whatever it is that you're going through, whatever it is you're feeling, don't do that stiff upper lip. No, I'll be all right. Just say, do you know what? This hurts. This is hard. This is really upsetting. Just recognize within yourself what is happening with you. So step one is to be aware, be mindful of what you're going through. Just allow yourself to notice the feeling. Step two, there is a tendency with human beings that when we're in a bad place, we can feel very isolated. It's only us, or I don't want to let people know. So the second one is what she calls common humanity. Realize you're not alone. Somewhere else, maybe you don't know them, or maybe you do, but someone somewhere else will be going through something very similar. You are not alone. However bad you're feeling, you are not alone. And to recognize that you are part of a common humanity, and at times we all hit those depths. And it's really helpful to realize that you are not isolated. And then the final one is, what can you do for yourself right now? And that might be, say, it's going to be okay. What can you give yourself right now? It may be a hug. It may be phone a friend. It may be go for a walk. What can you give yourself right in that moment? A small thing. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but find one little thing that will help you just in that moment. And that might be to say, yeah, this is hard. I'm not the only one. And right now I'm doing the very best I can. That counts. So those three steps, the self-compassion break, I find are really, really useful, because we so often try to push things artificially to the back of our minds, or ruminate on them. Both of those things don't work. In one, you just bottle things up and it'll explode, and in the other, you're overwhelmed. And hers is more like, when you've shaken up a bottle of fizzy drink and you gradually unscrew it. It's much more about that. Gradually let the pressure off. And the compassion break is brilliant for that. And if you go and look up Kristen Neff, or go to her website, it's on there completely free, both as a written thing that you can print out, or her guiding you through it. So it doesn't cost you a penny to do the Kristen Neff compassion break. Once you know the 3 steps, you can do it quite easily for yourself. Although she's got a lovely voice, so why wouldn't you have her guide you through it? But it is such a simple thing to do. And when I teach it, I can see people looking back at me going, you must be kidding me, really? And then they do it. And then you realize, wow, yeah, that actually helps. That really does help. So there are many, many things you could do, but that's not a bad place to start with Kristen Neff's self-compassion break.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for that little top tip there. And if you're wondering how to spell that and all those sort of things, don't worry. I will be getting some information back from Emma and Julie after the event, and we'll be able to put this into the show notes and be able to share that out with you afterwards and get the references and the links and everything for you as well. Thank you, Julie. Emma, I wanted to talk with you about another issue in education, which is, well, lots of words for it, but recruitment and retention crisis, I think, is the most popular phrase to is to do this. It is sort of how we would describe this. There is a massive shortage of teachers. Teachers have been leaving the profession in their droves for some time. We know there aren't really enough teachers to cover the places that are required within schools. And so it appears to me that having things like your pillars of belonging, where you have all that, you are feeling valued in your workplace and given the opportunity to thrive rather than just survive, it is super, super useful. I was just wondering, reflecting back on our conversation just a few moments ago, beyond those pillars of belonging, have you got any other things you're doing in your trust to support staff, not only with their professional learning, but to actually make sure that you not only attract great talent, and I hear talent management being discussed even more in education these days, but also then not only for recruiting staff, but then also sort of retaining those staff and supporting them and keeping that talent within as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I really wish I was part of one of these multi-academies that has lots of cash and can throw these big TLRs out there and all the rest of it. We don't. So we have to rely on not huge recruitment and retention bonuses or golden handshakes or however you want to refer it. We have to do it the hard way. So alongside the pillars of belonging, we also have a really strong people strategy. So we spend a lot of time in terms of developing our recruitment, our marketing, looking at how we put in there the benefits of working for us. We work around a set of agreed principles. So everyone within our organisation is a learner, and we will invest in that. We look at collective responsibility. So we work together. You're never on your own, picking up from what Julie was saying earlier in terms of it can feel like that. So there's a pillar there around collective responsibility. We look at continuous improvement. So it's always about how can we do things better. And then the biggest area that we work along is psychological safety and well-being. So have we got things in place where we have an EAP program? So we invest in an employer's assistance program that not only looks at doing the day-to-day around your glasses and things like that, but also offers 24-hour doctors' helplines, benefits in other areas as well as that. We run what we quite often find is that we need to make sure we have people at the heart of what we're delivering. So people need to be absolutely front and center of where our focus is. So we look at HR masterclasses. Are we making the most out of our people? Are we giving our people the skills that are needed to develop? Strong talent management within the organization. So what we will very quickly do is identify, and we've done this fairly recently, there's an ECT that we have known because they've worked in the organization previously. They're in their 2nd or 3rd year. We're already giving them projects that work across the multi-academy because of their strengths. So what you do is you give people that opportunity for enrichment and development to make sure that you keep them within.
Mm.
We have people calendars, so there'll be a focus each month in terms of well-being, opportunities for storytelling. One of the things that's quite rich in education is there will always be somebody who's encountered that, and they have a story that is really great to be heard.
That opportunity for people to sort of move beyond where they're at, and then open that opportunity so they don't feel either stifled or forgotten, and all those sorts of things. I remember, you know, I was looking to sort of move forward in my career, um, and one of the things that I was quite nervous about was public speaking. Would you believe, doing this sort of thing like I do now? But my colleagues and Wellbeing leadership gave me those opportunities to actually then go out and speak and sort of test the water, run my and organize my own teaching and learning events where I would have to compare and sort of make a fool of myself, but learn the sort of craft of public speaking and all these sort of things. Working and knowing what talent you've got within and supporting it in that sort of way seems a really great way to do that when you tie it in together with all these other
Um,
pillars of belonging that you've got as well, Emma.
And we have a really strong secondment opportunity for staff. So we kind of look that sometimes we will move staff around the organisation to fill needs and identify them. And it gives opportunity to work collaboratively, but also see the opportunities that we have within the multi academy. So we look at our talent management as a whole rather than
Mm.
individual schools.
That's good. That's one of the benefits of being in a trust, isn't it? You're able to sort of look at things across the piece rather than just within the one school. Not that you know that it's a small number of staff in a secondary school, but certainly if you're in a primary school, where often you'll have quite you know, smaller number of colleagues, that ability to be supported in collaborating and learning from others in similar settings in your locality can be you know super helpful, can't it?
Definitely.
Right. Julie, I want to. I'm mindful of time. We're ripping through our hour together. Julie, you shared that great sort of top tip for sort of pastoral leads back a few moments ago. Um, Mental health and emotional well-being isn't just for pastoral leads, though. Do you have any other sort of routines or practices that teachers or school leaders could adopt to help them? And I'll link this question in just a moment to you as well, Emma, about supporting school and trust leaders, because we often forget about them, don't we? We need to support teachers, but what about the school? Yeah, what about the school leaders? So I'll come to you with that question in a minute, Emma, and you might want to touch on that yourself as well, Julie. But have you got any other sort of practices or routines that people might find useful? We talked about one, for example, off air with the breathing things a few minutes ago, didn't we?
Yes, so the two, one breath-based, and one not. So let's do the breath-based one first. So there's a reason why there's so much emphasis on breath work, and that is literally, if you think of, very quickly go through the psychology of this, if you think of a human being as having a fight, flight, freeze system, they also have the opposite, which is a rest and digest system. And controlling your breathing will actually move you out of fight, flight, freeze, and into rest and digest. So it's not just a nice to have, it's a really important to have. Now, there are probably as many different breathing exercises as there are psychologists in the world, and probably a few more as well. So in many ways, it almost doesn't matter which one you do, as long as you're doing one that allows you to regulate your breath. But one of the simplest ones, and it's really easy to do, and no one needs to know that even that you're doing it, is a very simple breathe in for 5, breathe out for 5, hold for 2. In for 5, out for 5, hold for 2. And that's it. You can set your breath, and you can do that while you're sitting there. You can do it for a minute. And I always say to people, I don't care if you've got 48 jobs and 27 children. If you can do a couple of minutes of that every day, just a minute, lock yourself in the toilet if you have to, but just do a little bit of that. In for 5, out for 5, hold for 2. You will regulate your breath. And not only do you regulate your breath, you regulate your entire nervous system. So you stop producing as much cortisol, you stop producing as much as adrenaline, which are the stress hormones that are bad for us in big quantities. And instead, you move to a completely different state. It's that important and it's that simple. One that is trickier, because I can't give you an ABC instruction for it, but it's one of the big things and something I've spent a lot of my working life doing, is encouraging people to speak to themselves nicely. And when you speak to yourself, do it nicely. Now, if I may again mention Kristen Neff, I'm not on any royalty factor for Kristen Neff. I wish I was. But she did an amazing piece of research looking at American soldiers who went off to Afghanistan and Iraq and doing various tests on them. And then again, when they got back, looking at those who went on to develop, unfortunately, PTSD. And they looked at the factors. And the most common factor wasn't the action they saw, wasn't which battles they were in, wasn't what they saw happen in front of them, as horrendous as that was. The biggest influence on whether or not they developed PTSD was how they related to themselves. Did they travel with an inner friend who was supportive, or did they travel with an inner enemy who was highly critical? So when I say to people, speak nicely to yourself, it is not a soft option. It actually makes you amazingly resilient. Now, that isn't to say that you let yourself, oh, I'm not going to go to work today, I'll lie on the sofa and eat 18 donuts because that's nice. That's not what it means, as nice as that might be. But what it means is, in your good times, tell yourself, well done. In the bad times, tell yourself, you know what, that was not great, but it's okay. You can turn this around, you can make amends, you can do whatever, but find a way to speak as nicely to yourself as you would to your best friend. So those are my 2 tips: 552 and speak nicely to yourself.
Brilliant. And nice way to wrap it round at the end there with little reinforcements of the 2 messages. 552 and speak kindly to yourself. Reminds me a bit of Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. But been doing it just for yourself. Thank you so much, Julie. I mentioned, Emma, about school leaders, and so some great those 2 tips there, Julie, feed in quite nicely for everybody, don't they? But have you got any specific approaches you've sort of been working on within your trust to try and help those people in SLT and the most senior
Absolutely.
roles?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that amazes me in education, I've never worked in an organization quite like it, where leaders take all of that responsibility and all of the ownership on their shoulders, and kind of, it is very personal. And that's one of the things that we do. We have a leadership development program that's offered from middle leaders and aspiring middle leaders, where we look at personal energy sessions. So we look at what juices you, what's going to give you that ability to kind of be resilient, be kind to yourself, talk to yourself as you would your colleague sat next to you. We again have weekly briefings where we have the opportunity to kind of, as a group, work together if there's issues that are kind of sticky, or we need a little bit of support, or even a little bit of coaching. And I think coaching and mentoring is quite nice as well. We in the central team, we develop a buddy system. So I will have managers that work in very different areas that will buddy one another in terms of being able to help with that resilience, and that also time out and reflection on how great they're actually doing. Because I think we accomplish something and we move on and forget to recognize how great we've been. We are doing quite a lot of work around culture, and absolutely looking at the fact that unless you are in the best possible sense, how can you lead? So if you are not the best you can be, how are you going to lead the organization? So it's giving yourself permission to reflect on you. We, in part of our leadership development, we build in a residential, and we spend quite a lot of time looking at mindfulness. We give ability to reflect. So I think it's that reflective practice, but also putting you at the center of what you need to focus on. I know it sounds really simple, but we forget it.
It might sound simple to do, but it's hard to actually do it yourself because teachers are often their own worst enemy. They're often their biggest personal critics, and to be able to reflect, and all teachers are really reflective. But I think it goes back to what Julie was sharing before, and they'll be reflective, but then they won't be kind to themselves about it. They won't recognise they've done 99% of fixing every single thing. They'll focus on the 1%, the one little thing that didn't get done quite right. And actually, it takes time and practice to be good at recognizing, I think, those 99 things that you've done really, really well, because you're so clouded by the fact that, that one thing wasn't done quite so well. So again, taking the time, Emma, and giving colleagues that opportunity to both talk about those things and have the time to reflect upon it is really key. Because it goes back to what you were saying a second ago, doesn't it? Because if you're not in the best of frame of mind yourself, if you're not in the best position yourself, then how can you possibly lead when, again, you're spinning not just 5 plates, but sort of 55 plates? It's a bit like that. I've seen a meme before, and I'm sure you must have Chrome or whatever web browser you use, with like a million tabs open at the top. And teachers and school leaders' lives and professional lives are very much like that, where you've got all these things open at the same time, haven't you? And so being able to sort of keep on top of that is super tough. But yeah, thank you for sharing those things that approaches you're working on at the trust there, Emma. Thank you very much. I'm going to jump into one of our final questions now, around technology, seeing as I mentioned a web browser. It'd be remiss of me, with my sort of NetSupport hat on, being a technology company, to not have a little think about what sorts of technologies schools and individuals, teachers, or even pupils could have a little look at to help them around mental health and wellbeing support. So it's a question for both of you. I don't mind who goes first. I guess it's fastest finger first. Shall I go with you, Julie? Shall I? Have you got any platforms or tools that you might recommend that might be useful for people to have a little play around with?
Yes, well, I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of Derby, with, in fact, one of the world's greatest practitioners in compassion, Paul Gilbert. And as part of the worldwide compassion group there, they developed an app called the Compassion app. And it's nice that the icon for it is a Venn diagram of some orange circles, so you should be able to pick it out. And it takes you through some breathing exercises, of course. But it actually teaches you all about self-compassion. So it does both breathing and talking nicely to yourself. There's always the enhanced paid for version. Again, I'm not on a subscription to them, but there's the free version. And the free version is really cool because it measures your pulse by shining the camera light through your finger. And so it tells you how well you're doing your breathing exercises. So yes, I would say to people, there's lots of things you can explore out there, but if you want one that's backed and written by scientists, then the Compassion Act has been written by a couple of professors, so it's pretty good.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you so much for that, Julie. Did you have any recommendations at all, Emma?
We use Wellbeing, which is a platform around wellbeing, but offers
Yeah.
a lot of resources, so staff can tap into if they've got particular issues in certain areas. And one that I will signpost for anybody in education, Education Support. It's a charity, and it is aimed around staff working within education. Both are phenomenal.
Brilliant stuff. Great recommendations. And I love the Wellbeing story, founded by Mark Solomon, someone who's working in education, wanted to try and do something, found and develop something which would be useful, not just for him within his school, but others as well. So it's a great success story. And it's lovely to hear that you've been sharing about that on the webinar today, Emma. Thank you. So some lovely tech tips there to take away. I wanted to just ask you for sort of both sort of a last final takeaway. I'll dive in and see if there's any questions in just a moment. I haven't spotted any questions yet. If you haven't sent through a question yet for Julie or Emma that you would like to ask, then please do pop that into the chat soonish so that I can see if I've got time to pose those for Emma and Julie. But my last question for you, and I come to you first, Emma, so I'll flip it back to this time so you can go first, Emma. If you could share one sort of key takeaway or action point for people, because this is a webinar looking at sort of meaningful wellbeing approaches for the year ahead. If you could share just one key takeaway or action point for the people watching today regarding how they can further enhance their support around wellbeing, mindfulness, or workload, what would that be?
Breathe. take time for you and be good enough.
There
And I
you
think
go. Nice and simple there, Emma, isn't it? How do you go about doing that for yourself? Have you got any sort of personal reflections you could share about that?
I keep a gratitude journal. So at the end of every day, I will write 2 or 3 things that I'm grateful for, and I will write 2 things or 3 things that I feel great about myself. So what have I achieved? Because the jobs that we all do, you don't necessarily see an outcome every day, but you will achieve something every day. And then this sounds really dull, but of an evening when I'm sat around the family dinner table, we all share what's gone great today. And what it does is it changes that perception from I've had an horrendous day and I could tell you all about the cockroaches today, but what I can do is I can tell you about the great things that have happened.
Oh, that's superb. And just diving a little bit deeper on your gratitude journal, is that something you've sort of have you just bought like a blank book, or is there a specific sort of
Yeah.
gratitude journal that you've purchased? 'Cause there are a number of those sort of products out there, aren't there? So just wondered if you had some hints and tips about how you go about doing that bit.
There are some great books out there, but I'm also financially background as well, so I'm too cheap to buy them. I literally buy a book that I like the look of, so it needs to be pretty. It probably needs to be sparkly as well for me. And I literally kind of just I'll always draw a picture in it, and then I literally do my top 3 things, and I'll put the date on it so I can reflect, because it's also great as well when you're having a bad day to flick back and just see some of the things that you've done over the last week. And you think, well, actually, life is great, really.
That's brilliant. And I'm sorry to keep pinging questions back at you. I've tried this myself, you see, over the years, but I've always succeeded for a week or two, particularly around this time of year. I'll start it, I'll do it for a week, and then like, I get too busy and I don't give it the importance and time that it actually requires, and the dedication that it requires. How do you get past that bit, Emma? Have you got any sort of pointers around that?
Um, I think for me, I always do it at the end of the day, literally, and I'm sounding very girly, I'm not, but you take your makeup off, it's part of that ritual. So I kind of make it part of the ritual. So if the kettle's on and you're making your coat, whatever it is, it's part of that ritual in terms of
Mm.
shutting down for the day.
Brilliant stuff. So just sort of build it in, and it just becomes part of like, de rigueur of what you do. And I guess it must be nice as well because it sort of signifies that. So it's like the sort of analog equivalent of sort of closing your laptop lid down for the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for those tips there, Emma. Julie, same question over to you. What would be your sort of key takeaway or action point for people?
Well, Emma will be glad to know that I've got a gratitude journal by my bed, and I bought it in the sale at 20% off. So that should tick all of her boxes. Just to help you, Mark, I would say if you struggle to write it down, form an on your phone group. Yes, so I had an on your phone, it was happened to be a WhatsApp group, but other messages are available. Form a group and everyone post into it every day, and then you get to read each other's, and it's really quick, and you can scroll back to them. And you're a tech guy, so that may appeal more to people. It doesn't have to be a book. You can type a message in every day and see what everyone puts in, and that's great. What is it I would like people to take away? Well, right at the start of a new year. Sadly, in the UK, we are well behind the curve on getting positive education into schools. So what I'd like people to take away from this is go for it. Honestly, positive education makes such a difference in a school. The work I do is actually approved by the British Psychological Society. That's how much it matters. It can reduce the burden on CAMS. It's about prevention. Let's stop it before it starts. And yes, we need to look after ourselves. Let's get together as a community and say, let's make it this year that we make positive education in schools the biggest goal and take the biggest leap forward. We are behind such small nations in the world, and we can do this. And I've seen the interest in it grow and grow and grow. So let's make it the year that schools go, do you know what, let's do it. Let's do positive education. Let's get it in. Let's make a difference to staff and pupils. Let's reduce the load on CAMS. Let's try to prevent as much as we can. And we know through research that we can reduce the load on CAMS by a huge percentage by bringing positive ed into schools up to, well, and in fact, just over 40%. You can reduce the referral rate to CAMS. So if we can do that, we can free up that resource for those who will need it. And we can prevent children following that path, which means if we put our hard financial heads on, I'm sure Emma would approve of that bit, then we can actually make massive savings further down the line when those children become adults and they already know how to stay well. So let's make it the year of pos ed in schools and go down that direction. We have everything to gain and absolutely nothing to lose.
Thank you ever so much, Julie. I'm mindful. I mean, I'm going to share. And I'll ask you to be able to share where people can sort of get in touch with you and follow up following the webinar in just a moment. But if I was in the audience, I'd say, well, this sounds great. Where can I learn more about positive education? Where would you signpost people to try and go and look, Julie?
Well, me for a start. But and I can be found. The easiest place to find me is on, if you go to YouTube, put my name in and the words positive education after it. There's a whole little load of animations come up teaching you how to put pos ed in your schools and interviews with heads who've done it, so you can find out from them how that went. So that's the easiest way, and from there you'll be able to pick out my website and get hold of me. The website's called thewlbc.com, so the Work-Life Balance Centre, thewlbc.com. The originator, however, the big man who started all this off, is a guy called Professor Martin Seligman. And you put his name into YouTube and you will find tens of thousands of bits of information. There are TED Talks, there are other discussions. He is amazing. He's still speaking. He's 78, 79 now, still packing out halls. When you get 1,000 people travel to London to listen to a psychologist, you know something big is happening. And he makes everyone cry. But, so take a look at what Seligman says. And then if you go onto the animations on YouTube, it'll teach you how to do some very basic stuff. And if you want to know more than just some basic stuff, get a hold of me that way.
Yeah, and I'll just do a ringing endorsements. If you're looking for someone to share about these sort of things in your school, Julie does deliver a whopper of a keynote. So if you're looking for someone for an inset day, then she gets a very strong recommendation from herself. She was absolutely superb, as was Emma. On the day, say I wouldn't have asked either, both of them to have come on and share with us this afternoon if they hadn't have done such a brilliant job sharing the things that they're involved with. So Julie is on Twitter, Julie WLBC, I believe. It's a Twitter handle. Emma, you're not a Twitter person, or at least that I could find, but Emma is on LinkedIn. So if you have a look for Emma Samuel, you'll find her there. All the things that I've heard from Emma and Julie during the course of the conversation today, the websites, the names, the references, the apps, the tools, so forth and so on. We'll ping those out with the recording for you. But any final things that you just like to say, Emma or Julie, before we say goodbye?
I think for me it was one, thank you very much, and it's great to see you again, Emma. It's been lovely. Yeah, kind. Just be kind to each other, to ourselves, definitely. But let's look at kindness, because it is the biggest force in the world. So let's just really and truly be kind.
And what a lovely way then to end this webinar this afternoon. Thank you so much, Emma and Julie, for taking the time to come and share your experiences and knowledge with us here on this webinar. If you're interested in our next webinars or anything else related to the topics that we cover, then please do visit our website, netsupportsoftware.com. But for now, this is me, Mark Anderson, Head of Education at NetSupport, saying thank you to you for joining us for this webinar,